Get started. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. I want to thank all of you for being here. Just a reminder, if you could mute your microphones, and at the end, I'm happy to take questions, depending on everybody's timing and everything, but I'm happy to take some questions at the end, and we can unmute then. I'm not sure if Father Woodward is on right now. I don't see him. But so I just want to thank Father Woodward and St. Paul's Church for welcoming us today. My name is Dylan Terrell. I'm the Executive Director of Caminos de Agua, and we're here today to talk about the water situation here in the region. So I guess without further ado, I'll just get started. And again, we can take some questions at the end. Someone from my team is also on here, so you can send questions in the chat throughout. I may or may not be able to see them. I'm not fully sure. But if I do catch them, I can try to answer them during the presentation, or at the end we can take a look. But feel free. So let me just go ahead and share my screen. Okay. So, once again, my name is Dylan Terrell, Executive Director of Caminos de Agua, and again, I just want to thank Father Woodward and the St. Paul's Church for co-sponsoring this event, or sponsoring this event for us today, and sending this out to their list there. Essentially, this is kind of the agenda that I want to go through today, and I want to start about the main goal is to talk about our water crisis, and kind of some of you, I'm sure, maybe have heard me speak before, or someone from my team. I gave a similar presentation to this one a couple weeks ago with the Midday Rotary Club. So if you're on that one, I apologize, but this is going to be very similar. A couple small changes, but not too much. But so to talk about our crisis, our water crisis here in San Miguel and the surrounding region, I really need to set the context a little bit. So I'm going to talk a little bit about global water stress and what I call the new class of water contamination. I think those are two concepts that we really need to understand what's happening to us here regionally, and then more specifically what's happening here in San Miguel. And then with that, talk about what the consequences are. These are, health consequences as well as and other consequences. Then I'd like to talk a little bit about Caminos de Agua, who we are, what our current programs are, and what we're up to these days. And then just take a little bit of time at the end to talk about where we go next. So with all this information, what is it that we can do, and where are we going as an organization? And then again, at the end, I'm happy to take questions. We can do that in the chat box. I don't think there's tons of us on here, so I'm also happy to unmute. If everybody wants to unmute, we can do it that way as well. So just jumping right in here. Sorry, just 1 second. I want to turn off my sound here. So I'm going to talk about two major concepts starting off with, and the first of those is water stress, and the second is water contamination, and a very specific water contamination. But first on water stress. So just very briefly, I want to talk about groundwater and about aquifers. So aquifers are very important. It's essentially the water that we drill up from underground. And about 35% of all the water we use as humans globally comes from groundwater. And actually about 2.5 billion people globally depend on groundwater as their sole source of water. And that's pretty much the case for us here in central Mexico, and actually in much of central and northern Mexico. Right now, about 20% of all the aquifers in the world are overexploited. So what does that mean? That means we're taking out more water from these aquifers every year from this groundwater source that can be recharged naturally by rainfall that enters in through infiltration and recharges these aquifers. So that means we're taking out more water than can go back in, and that means the water table is slowly dropping. And that's what these red, orange, that's what all these colors mean here. So from low stress to high stress, you can see here throughout the United States and throughout huge parts of Mexico, we have some very severe water stress, which is in the extremely high area, extremely high level. So what does it mean when you're in extremely high water stress? It means that you're at risk of what we call day zero. Day zero is an event when essentially you run out of available water resources due to drought and things like that. So this is something that is not it's not fictitious. It's something that happens, unfortunately, all the more often. You may have heard about Cape Town, South Africa a few years ago, or Chennai, India, just back in 2019, when about 9 million people went pretty much overnight without water. Their water resources dried up due to drought. And this also means this extremely high water level, extremely high water stress level also means that we're taking out, we're seeing water table losses, upwards of centimeters per year to get into that higher up category. And it's essentially projected that by 2050, right now we have about 2.5 billion people who depend solely on groundwater, and about 3.6 billion people are going to be living in water scarcity conditions, some sort of water scarcity conditions by 2050. That's going to be roughly half of the entire global population is going to be suffering from some of those extreme water stress. Another thing to mention is just about we have about 21 of the 37 largest aquifers in the entire world are currently being depleted, which means that they are being over extracted. And now the other thing I want to introduce at the top here is the second theme I'm going to be talking a lot about, which is what I call the new class of water contaminants. And this is what we're talking about, essentially different types of chemicals. In this case, I'm showing some synthetic chemicals. These are like man-made chemicals from agro industry, mining, other industries that are essentially polluting water supplies around the world. This is what we call, these are organic chemicals, or what we call synthetic chemicals. You may have heard things like PFAS happening in the United States. It's an organic chemical that's contaminating water supplies around there. And the point of all of talking about contaminants, of these types of contaminants, is that they're very difficult to remove and they require very specialized solutions. Back in the 20th century and before, we were basically worried about pathogens, about what we call biological contaminants, which is pathogens, virus, parasites, things like that we can get in the water. So actually living biological contaminants. Today, we don't have that luxury to only worry about those types of contaminants. We live in a new age where there's lots of different chemicals infiltrating our water supplies around the world, and most of these require very specialized and in many cases very targeted solutions. So with that, we also have what we call naturally occurring chemicals. These are inorganic contaminants. So these are a different class of chemical contaminants. You can think of things like, well, I guess technically lead in Flint, Michigan. Here we're going to be talking a lot about arsenic and fluoride. And these are just very difficult contaminants to remove from the water. In our case, what we're specifically talking about again is arsenic and fluoride. These are naturally occurring mostly throughout Mexico and other parts of the world. It's mostly naturally occurring. That's not 100% the case in all of these cases, specifically for arsenic. But these are even more difficult to remove than this class of more synthetic chemicals. Most of these are a little bit more easy to remove than what we're going to be talking about more, which are these naturally occurring chemicals, and very specifically arsenic. So around Mexico, we were part, Caminos de Agua were part of a national network called INCA, which is the National Water Quality Inventory for its acronym in Spanish. And through this network, we've estimated that there's about 21 million people across 20 different states in Mexico that are exposed to excessive levels of arsenic and or fluoride in their drinking water. Globally, that's about 300 million at least that are exposed to these very difficult to remove water contaminants. And again, we've tracked this across about 20 different states throughout the country. So jumping back again, I'm going to be jumping back and forth between this idea of water scarcity and water stress and water contamination, and specifically arsenic and fluoride. So in our region, Guanajuato has one of the highest indices of water vulnerability in the entire world. About 70% of all of our aquifers are overexploited right now. And with that, in our region, well, in our state actually, about 30% of we're about 30% overdrawn, which means we're taking out 30% more water every year than can be recharged naturally by rain infiltrating the aquifer. So what does that mean? It means that we're losing massive amount of water in our aquifers throughout the state. We're talking about 1 million cubic meters per year. That's the equivalent of like 7 Allende, Presa Allende dams every year that we lose from our underground water. That equates to about 2 to 3 meters per year. Now, again, I mentioned this a little bit earlier, but to get into this extremely high water stress level, what we're talking about is centimeter loss, and again, we're measuring that loss in meters per year. So we are substantially higher than that. Now, unfortunately, Guanajuato has the unfortunate honor of being the second most water stress state in the entire country, just behind Baja California Sur. We measure this in a water index of 1 to 5, and 5 meaning like you're basically at day 0. Guanajuato is at 4.94, and again, only Baja California is above that, I think at 4.98 or something like that. But just to mean that we can't really take many hits to the system here. We can't really handle these massive droughts and stuff that are going to be becoming more and more complicated with climate change moving forward, unless we figure out a way to rein in our groundwater use. So zooming in a little bit more, this is the area that we look to impact specifically in Caminos de Agua. This is what we call the Upper Rio Laja watershed. We use the watershed as a natural border, a natural boundary, because we're not a government agency. We're not confined by municipalities or state borders and things like that. So what we use is a natural boundary, and in this case, it's the Upper Rio Laja watershed, which are these 7 municipalities in the northern part of Guanajuato State. You can see here. You can see San Miguel. This is the Rio Laja that runs into the Presa Allende here. San Miguel is in the lower part of the watershed, and a lot of our work in Caminos de Agua is up in these regions up here. This region has a population of somewhere around 680,000 people, and about 2,800 different communities, so both rural and urban. When I say communities, I'm talking about more rural communities, but that also includes the urban centers of San Miguel, Dolores Hidalgo, San Luis de la Paz, etc. So the problem here, so this is something that we talk about quite a lot, but essentially with the advent of tube well technology, we started drilling wells in the 1940s and 1950s, and by the 1960s, we were drilling wells we had about 400 to 700 wells in the region, and those wells were probably somewhere between 5 and 40 meters deep. And then with the advent of, with the first Green Revolution in the 1970s, we started drilling more and more wells, and our wells started to drop because we were already over-extracting the water at that time. And so by the 70s, our wells reached over 100 meters, 150 meters deep. By the 1980s and 1990s, it wasn't uncommon to see wells about 200 meters deep. We had drilled upwards of 2,500 wells by the end of the 90s. And then today, or I guess in 2019 when we updated this last, we had definitely over 3,500 wells in the entire region. Again, this is just the watershed region, so those 7 municipalities up in the northern part of the state. And we, again, are seeing massive water table loss, 2 to 3 meters per year, and that is data from the State Water Commission. That's from the state government. That's about as real as you can get. And our wells today have to go upwards of 200 to like 500 meters deep. Most of the wells we've seen that were drilled in the past 5 years or so are usually, they're definitely over 200 or 300 meters deep, and many of them are closer to 500 meters deep. And with that, what we see is this arsenic and fluoride really starting to contaminate our wells. We started seeing this way back when in the late 90s, early 2000s for sure, and now we're just seeing that becoming more and more concentrated, because what we're doing is we're drilling deeper and deeper into the aquifer, and we're sucking up water that's much, much older. We're talking about, we've got fossil water, which is potentially tens of thousands of years old, that's mingling with this water down below, and have been mingling with volcanic rocks for many, many years, and taking up these inorganic chemicals, these inorganic contaminants, arsenic and fluoride in our case. And so today we just see that those concentrations continuing to increase over time. To look at this a little bit differently, I just want to show this. This is the number of wells drilled throughout our region, again, just our region, the northern part of Guanajuato, since like 1950, when we had like 2 or 3 wells. And I show this point here in 1983. This is what we call the last Veda decree, and that was a decree that was put on the entire state of Guanajuato, saying that no new wells can be drilled without federal approval. That was in 1983, because they knew as early in 1983, almost 40 years ago now, that we were already over-extracting our groundwater. It means that they already knew that we were in a water deficit all the way back then. As you can see, we continued to drill wells through a variety of different mechanisms, some of them more legal than others. But the point being is that, these decrees have had various degrees of success and honestly have not been very successful in most cases. Also looking at this, I want to talk about where this water goes. So you can see right here, this is irrigated agribusiness in the state of Guanajuato from 1950 on. And you can see here that this goes pretty hand in hand with the drilling of our wells, of just massive extraction of our groundwater for specifically agricultural business. In fact, it's almost exclusively, I should say, export agriculture. So most of the water we extract in our region doesn't stay in this region. It goes to the U.S. and some other European markets in the form of high water intensive crops. Guanajuato has been at one point, I don't know if it's still the case, but is at one point the second largest exporter in the world, just the state of Guanajuato, of broccoli, the second largest exporter in the world of broccoli. Roughly 85% of all the groundwater we extract in our watershed goes to agriculture, and in this case, it's almost all exclusively mid to large scale agriculture. We're not talking about the small campesino farmers. We're talking about mid to large scale agriculture, and almost all exclusively for export. So what's happening more specifically in San Miguel? Well, this was the unfortunate case. This is the Allende Dam just a couple months ago, and the reservoir, I should say. And as I'm sure many of you noticed, it was at its lowest levels in decades because of a major drought that we suffered through last year. We can see here, this is what the Presa Allende looked like in 2011, and the same shot here in 2021. So things weren't looking so good. We have gotten a lot more rain already this year, which is great. But one point being here is, due to climate change, we're going to be having a lot more of these kind of events. Where we have some really bad years. In general, rainfall is going to be dropping across the board, but we're also going to be seeing years with massive rain events. And so that's going to have a lot of other implications, not only about water supply, but also things like landslides, flooding in the urban center and other parts of the city and the watershed. We're going to be having a lot more issues because when it does rain, it's going to rain much harder, and we're going to have much more severe rain events. And then we're also going to have a lot more drought, unfortunately. So that's kind of where we are going. Again, luckily, I would just like to say that this year we've had about half the rainfall we would normally expect in a rainy season already this year. So that's really positive for this year, at least. We're just entering the rainy season technically by historical standards, and we're already seeing a lot more rainfall than we have in recent years. Jumping in, I want to talk a little bit about the water quality in San Miguel. So this is from our water quality maps. I'll explain a little bit more detail a little bit later, but this is essentially showing arsenic and fluoride contamination throughout San Miguel. And you can see here the colonias that are in red, orange, and then the black ones are very, very high for these contaminants. But red and orange also means that you shouldn't be drinking this water with any sort of regularity. And it's also very hard to treat, which again, I'll talk about in a minute here. And to give a little more visualization here, here's the fluoride limits we see. So this 1.5 line here is the WHO limit. It's also the Mexican norm. It's the Mexican limit as well. 1.5 milligrams per liter fluoride. That's the maximum that we can have in our drinking water, and it be considered safe for human consumption. And here you can see just a list of the different colonias. We've got San Antonio, a couple in San Antonio, Independencia, all these different colonias here within the urban center, mostly within the urban center, minus Totonilco and Cieneguita, with excessive levels of fluoride in water. We see upwards of, in the urban area, about 60% above the limit, and this does have a health impact. This has an absolute health impact in many people who do drink this water, which many people do in these colonias. Arsenic, I'm going to show the WHO limit right now. We haven't actually reached, in the urban center, the Mexican limit is 25 here, micrograms per liter. The WHO limit is 10. Just a brief thing here, but the EPA, the US EPA recommendation for arsenic, that's not the limit, but the recommendation is to have have 0. That's what's considered safe, because arsenic is not really safe at any level. But these are the regulations. This is what's considered okay. I shouldn't even say okay to drink. Arsenic's not okay at any level, but 10 is what is considered acceptable by the World Health Organization. And again, these are the same colonias, and we can see the arsenic in some of these is more than twice the World Health Organization limit. And again, the Mexican limits way up here, but I don't put much stock into that because it's not based on public health. It's just it's a political limit that has no real basis. So before we go a little more deep in that, I do want to nip one thing in the bud here, and we get lots of questions, especially recently, about the development of San Miguel and what this has on the impacts of water supplies. So this is the historic center, and we can see how it's grown substantially in just in recent decades. You can see here in 2020. I'm going to show you this here, which is going to be a little bit depressing to this. This is from the official municipal planning document called the PM Duet, which was approved last year, it was approved at December 31st at 12 o'clock at night. And this was an amendment added to it, and it just shows the urbanization of San Miguel. So this isn't translated, but this is showing where we are in 2019, about 2,867, and that's going to, the urban perimeter, perimetro, I don't know how to translate, perimeter, is going to grow about threefold in the next 20 years. So this urbanization, this rapid urban development in San Miguel is going to have an impact on water. We're going to have more stress in a small area, which means we're likely going to have to drill wells deeper and things like that. And it's probably going to have a big impact on contamination and specifically arsenic levels. I'm not going to go into the reasoning behind that right now, but we do see there's evidence to show that arsenic levels specifically, much more so than fluoride levels, but there's multiple mechanisms on how arsenic is getting into our water. All has to do with the over-extraction, but just different mechanisms on how that works. And that arsenic levels, increasing arsenic levels are tied to over-extraction in a single point. So what we have is, an expanding urban area, but we have lots of extraction in kind of that one centralized area, which is going to likely increase those levels. At least that's our theory. So how are they going to get all the water for this really rapid expansion? So you may have heard about this. This is the water solution that is being touted by the last administration. As far as we understand, the incoming administration is also going to push this through, called the Aquaférico. This is they're investing about 170 million pesos into this project. So what is the Aquaférico? Well, the idea, this is again from the same urban planning document that's already been approved, is to drill 9 wells, or at least 8, and tap into an existing one all around here. This is all the Presa Allende, the Allende reservoir here, in communities around here, and pump that water out up to some centralized points. Now, this work has already started. One well has already been put online. It was an existing well, and then a couple of other wells have already been drilled. One upwards of 300 meters deep, from what one of the directors of SPASMA told us last week. Another one I think is about 60 to 80 meters deep, 80 to 100 meters deep. Sorry. And I think that's wells 5 and 6, if I'm not mistaken, but I couldn't be mistaken on that. But some of these wells have started to be drilled. Now, what we do know is that they were likely, well, almost certainly drilled without federal approval, because CONAGUA, the Federal Water Authority, came in and shut down the operation. Now, SPASMA is saying that they're moving forward with the project, and the exploratory drilling and all of that is still happening. As we understand, they can't actually drill any wells until SPASMA, or until either they provide the environmental impact studies, which were not provided prior, or SPASMA or CONAGUA gives its official approval. But the idea is that they're moving forward with this. And so this is the idea of how to get water to the growing urban population of San Miguel in the coming years and decades. This is estimated from, we haven't seen any scientific research, any scientific reports on this. We've looked all around for them, but we haven't gotten access to any of that information. But they say it will guarantee water for urban San Miguel for the next 30 years. So as you can see, I mean, it's a pretty aggressive program, and it's only going to last for 30 years potentially. It's just kind of highlights the crisis that we are dealing with. Now, I want to jump back to this. So the overdevelopment is important, but again, 85% of all the water we extract in our region goes to agricultural development. And so the water table loss and all that, yes, we're going to have issues on the urban center on getting enough water to people, but Agriculture, again, is the main culprit of all of these water problems. And the reason that our water table is so low is not because of urban development necessarily. It's much more so because of agriculture. And so with that, what does that mean for San Miguel? Well, if you guys can't read this, this is all the wells in San Miguel. There's 681 wells. If you can't really see that number there, it's about 93% of all water extracted in San Miguel de Allende and the municipality goes to mid to large scale industrial agriculture. So that number for San Miguel is actually even higher than the watershed-wide average. So what are the consequences here? We've got several different classes of consequences here. The first one I want to talk about is the health consequences of people who do have to drink this water. So fluoride on health. Fluoride, first of all, it's important to say that fluoride is absolutely necessary. We do need some levels of fluoride in our body, and fluoride has probably been the main driver behind the end of tooth decay, which used to be a big thing many decades ago and centuries ago. That said, the fluoride levels we have registered throughout this region has really impacted the health. So it's just like pretty much everything, too much of a good thing is going to have a detrimental impact. And so with that, what we see is that fluoride, the reason we use fluoride on teeth, on our toothpaste topically on our teeth, is because fluoride has a very strong reaction with calcium. We've got calcium in our teeth, we've got calcium in our bones, and we also have calcium in our brains. And with that, once you start consuming fluoride, so actually drinking fluoride or cooking with it, but mostly drinking it at excessive levels, and again, the levels we see here, which are substantially above World Health Organization limits, sometimes 10 to 12 times above those limits, is when you see the negative impacts. And so you start seeing the fluoride actually deteriorating the calcium deposits. So what we see first is what we call severe dental fluorosis. This girl here is in San Miguel de Allende. She was drinking water that was only about 2 times above the World Health Organization limit for fluoride, which sounds like a lot, and it is a lot, but it's not anywhere close to the levels we see in other communities. She's already been diagnosed with what is considered severe dental fluorosis. This is an irreversible condition. It can be covered up temporarily, but it's irreversible. And what we're going to start seeing more and more of with the higher levels that we see, if specifically children continue to drink this over long periods of time, is what's called crippling skeletal fluorosis. So this is actually the deformation and weakening of the bones throughout the development stages of life. And another thing that we see with studies coming out more and more recently in the last 3 to 5 years or so, there's been more important studies looking at the cognitive development and learning disabilities in children who are overexposed to fluoride from pregnancy on. Unfortunately, fluoride does pass through the umbilical cord as well as through breast milk, as far as we can tell. So it's a major issue. And again, well, not again, but just to state kind of what I'm getting at here is that fluoride very specifically impacts children, especially through the development stages of their lives, much more acutely than adults. You don't see people who start drinking fluoride-contaminated water develop severe dental fluorosis later on in life, but with children, we absolutely do. So if we can get children off of this contaminated water as quickly as possible, we can help, get this generation off of these of living with these health impacts. Now, arsenic, this is a whole other animal. I alluded to it a little bit before, but arsenic, there's no good level of arsenic, and it was actually called, arsenic was discovered in groundwater supplies in Bangladesh in the 1970s, 1980s, and up until today, and just massive public health impact in Bangladesh, and with that, the World Health Organization called that the largest mass poisoning of a population in history was due to naturally occurring arsenic found in the groundwater in that region. And again, I mentioned this briefly, but we have the goal of, we have the recommendation of 10 globally, of 10 micrograms per liter of arsenic in the water globally. We're starting to see other countries like the Netherlands drop that down to 3, keep dropping down because we see even over time, just being exposed to even lower levels of arsenic can cause chronic health conditions over time. And that's why the US EPA goal for arsenic is 0. So even though the limit is 10, the goal is 0, if that makes sense. So what kind of health consequences are we talking here? Well, they're all pretty bad. What we have here is, we also have things like cognitive development and learning disabilities in children. Arsenic is really closely associated to different skin conditions. So there's something called arsenicosis, which you can see here, and arsenic foot is, what this condition has been called. Lesions on the skin, and even things like kidney disease. But the specific thing's been tied very, very closely to two specific cancers, that being skin cancer and gallbladder cancer, but also some other types of cancers, including lung, kidney, and liver, and others as well. Arsenic is just basically poison to us, and as little bit as we have in our drinking water, in our food, and things like that, the better off we will all be. So why not just filter out the arsenic and fluoride? So this is kind of the point of why I'm focusing so much on this, is that these are solutions filters or Berkey filters. Pretty much any option you can think of is not designed to remove arsenic and fluoride. These are very difficult contaminants to remove from the water. They're completely dissolved dissolved contaminants in the water, and they require either some sort of chemical reaction or ultrafiltration. I can talk a little bit later about what solutions are available, but basically the only real viable commercial option. There are some kind of some boutique kind of solutions and things like that. But really the one that you can go by the harvester today is what's called reverse osmosis, that will remove arsenic and fluoride, but most people do not have that. And so really buying bottled water or installing reverse osmosis or looking for another solution, another water source like rainwater is the best way to go, and really the only way to go. So yeah, just simply stated, most filters don't work. So if you're in doubt, it probably doesn't work. But you can feel free to reach out to us, and we'd be happy to take a look at it for you. So if there's no appropriate solutions, we really need to focus on things like education and implementation of what is appropriate. Now, one other thing I just want to mention is the other consequences, which are this idea of day zero. Again, we have very little water. Yes, it's very contaminated, but it's also very, very scarce and becoming more and more scarce. Now, there's this kind of common misconception that, like, it's going to hit these massive populations, and it's just going to kind of come out of nowhere. And the idea is that it doesn't really work like that. Like, day zero has already arrived here. It just hasn't arrived in urban San Miguel. It's arrived in the outlying rural communities. We work in several communities that have dealt with their wells completely drying in and collapsing in on themselves, some no more than 10 to 15 minutes right outside of downtown urban San Miguel. This is something real, and day zero doesn't come all at once, but it comes in these kind of waves and stages, and that's just the unfortunate reality, that water runs out quite frequently. And it does run out in the urban center, we just don't feel it. By the urban center is made up of 20 different wells that all mix with each other a little bit, and well, not all of them, but many of them, and Sapazma finds ways to make sure that we'll stay online by either continuing to drill them deeper or combining them with other wells and things like that. But essentially stated is that water is going to run out. It's going to become more and more scarce. And it's not to say it's going to run out for everybody. What it means is that we're going to have to keep drilling deeper and deeper and deeper. Now, in the urban center, that's not a huge problem. I mean, it's a problem for many other reasons. But it's not going to say that, we in our urban houses are going to run out of water tomorrow. What it is to say is that it's going to continue to increase the levels of contamination and make the disruptions much more severe. So having water without a couple days and things like that are going to be much more common. Yeah, so just to state, I would just want to make sure it's clear, but like, it's really low-income, at-risk communities that are going to be most impacted, and are already most impacted by this. Most people in San Miguel already have cisterns under their homes, and most of you probably don't even know that you already don't receive water every day. And now there's going to be more and more time put between that, so there's a chance that we might feel it more and more. But again, really the biggest risk is for people who are dependent on wells in the rural areas that and they don't have another water source, and they don't necessarily have the funds to drill hundreds of meters deeper. It's very, very, very expensive to drill a well. So now moving on to who we are, who is Caminos de Agua, what is it we're doing? So our mission is to improve human health and community well-being through adequate and affordable access to clean water. Currently speaking, we have 5 major programs. We have 2 which are much more technically involved, and so this is the development of water technology, developing different clean water solutions, low-cost solutions, and water monitoring. So we monitor water quality and other things throughout the region and throughout the country as well to a certain degree. We also implement solutions with local communities, mostly local communities, rural communities at risk, and provide education programs and implementation of things like rainwater harvesting systems. And then our fifth program, which is our newest, we've been working on it for a few years, but we don't have the best name for it. But right now we're calling collaboration and policy. So really trying to attack the root causes of these problems. So we find that we have to create a balance between looking at the long-term impact. And so this is the idea of trying to create coherent public water policies and water management for the long term that will help attack the root causes of our water crisis and hopefully help do things like heal our aquifers over time. But we have to balance that with the real world needs of people who are impacted today. So these are, people, again, often in rural settings who just don't have the luxury to wait the years or the decades that it's going to take to come up with the political solutions to this problem. And that's why we develop solutions and we implement them with local communities. So stepping back to the technical side of the organization. So again, we have really two faces of the organization. We're a technical organization developing water solutions and doing things like this program, water monitoring. And we're also a very social environmental organization implementing solutions for the past 10 years here in the region. So starting with this technical side of the organization with our water monitoring program, this is our oldest program that we started almost a decade ago, started a little bit later on. And today we've tested upwards of about 600 sites throughout the region. We do this in partnership with many different university partners, as well as some labs and a national network. And with that, we also partner on the national level with this national network to get national water quality data integrated into our system. So this is our online water quality map that you can reach through our website. This is kind of the outline of the watershed that I showed earlier on. This is the region that we're working on here, San Miguel, right here in the middle. And again, these the green points mean that this meets all of the water quality standards, at least in terms of arsenic and fluoride. Orange means that this is water that's not safe for children under the ages of about 7 or 8 years old. They shouldn't be drinking this water consistently. The red means that this is not safe for anybody if consumed regularly, and the black means this is not safe for anybody to drink ever, not even once. It's not. You just shouldn't drink this water. Unfortunately, many people in these communities are drinking this water. So what does this look like on a different format? Well, here we go. These are the fluoride levels we see. So this dotted line here is the World Health Organization limit, as well as the Mexican limit of 1.5. We see in the severe cases upwards about 12 to 15 times above that limit. And these are communities where people are drinking that water. In total, about 40% of all of the different water sources we've studied are above the limit. That's all these red points here, which are anywhere from, 1 to 3 or 4 times above the limit there. Fluoride, or arsenic, I should say, sorry. Again, we're about 40% of all the sites we've tested, roughly speaking, are above the World Health Organization limits for arsenic. This is the actual Mexican norm. Again, Mexico is one of the fewest countries, one of the only countries in the world that doesn't go along with the World Health Organization, at least in terms of the arsenic standard, which is just very, very unfortunate, but it's the case. But as you can see, we still have about 10 to 15% of the wells tested are still above the Mexican norms as well. And in this case right here, what we're showing here is that this is about 22 times above the World Health Organization limit, or about 10 times above the Mexican limit for arsenic. And this is unfortunately in communities where they are drinking this water. One thing that this program helps us do is to look at trends over time. So one thing we've noticed specifically with arsenic that we haven't noticed with fluoride, and this is what I was mentioning before, why we think we might start seeing increases in arsenic in the urban center of San Miguel, is that arsenic is rising much more rapidly than fluoride is. And we have a bunch of different theories on why that's happening, and we won't go into that now, but just to say that these kind of light blue bars here is a community well that was tested, around 2013 to 2015, and these dark blue ones is that same well tested just a few years later. And as you can see here, like, this is a 4-fold increase in just a few years' time of arsenic in that particular community well. And so this is something that we're seeing throughout the watershed. We're seeing it a lot more in the urban center as well, just increasing arsenic levels. And so that's part of what this program helps us monitor, is to really see where we want to go and where we want to have our impact by monitoring the water quality over time. Now, I mentioned this before, but this is the National Water Quality Inventory that we partner with. It's a network of academics and a few other NGOs around the country partnering with the federal government, specifically looking at arsenic and fluoride in the water throughout the country. That's why we estimate there's about 21 million people in Mexico impacted by these contaminants. It's through the work of this network here, and this is a book that we all published together with the Secretaría de Gobernación at the federal level a few years back. Now, one thing that we were able to achieve with this was to get all of Conagra's monitoring sites throughout the country for arsenic and fluoride, and we were able to put that on our own water quality map. So again, you can go to our map and actually zoom out from our watershed, out from San Miguel, and see the entire country here and see the arsenic and fluoride throughout the country. I know this looks like a mess right here, but you can zoom into any of these points and see kind of where it's happening. And as you can see there, without as crowded as it is seeing it at this level, you can see lots of red and black throughout the country, throughout mostly the middle to the upper part of the country, but also some in the south as well. So another one of our programs is education. So we do lots of different types of education. That's why I'm here right now today, is to try to get the word out through multiple different audiences and multiple different platforms and avenues. What we see here is the bulk of what we do is community education. So we're working in close to a dozen different communities right now, doing education and also implementation projects on the water crisis, on solutions, on how we mitigate these issues. We have developed many different materials over the years, lots of rainwater harvesting materials and things like that. This is our new water course, essentially. What we found is that there wasn't lots of good water education focused on these very complex chemicals that we're dealing with, at least community education. And so we spent about a year and a half developing the seven module program. All this information is available on our website. If anybody wants one of these manuals, it's all available for free to download digitally. But this is a major program that we worked on, and we partnered with the municipal government of San Miguel last year to train other NGOs and high schools through this through these materials and how to use these materials. Just one thing to note that we did last year as well is we had to adapt during the age of coronavirus, because given the fact that there's very scarce water resources throughout the region, we were forced to amend what we were doing and try to help communities most at risk due to water scarcity. So focusing less on the contamination last year and more on water scarcity, and trying to get people water solutions like this low-tech hand washing station that, a gallon can wash 30 hands or something like that, or a liter, I can't remember exactly, something like that. But very low flow, just trying to find water conservation strategies that allow people to still meet the hygiene requirements for COVID, essentially. We're starting some new initiatives. We're currently in talks with the state education secretary, the state, education. Secretary of Education, there it is, on developing some programs that we've already done a lot of in high schools. We did some projects with the municipal government over the last couple of years, and some other initiatives throughout the years with various different partners, mostly in high schools. We haven't done lots and lots of like elementary or middle school, just because these issues are pretty complex. So we focus largely on high school initiatives. And now one thing we're doing, again, why I'm here today, is that we're launching this year a new urban education initiative. So we realized like the issues in urban San Miguel are impacting people mostly in lower income colonias. That's also where the water contamination seems to be the highest, not exclusively speaking, but it seems to be the case more often than not. And so we're really focusing. We feel a responsibility essentially to work with these impacted neighborhoods throughout San Miguel to help them understand their water issues, specifically the water contamination issues. So we'll be starting this new urban education issue. We're going to be doing lots of different things, but our main goal is going to be focusing on these neighborhoods, specifically these neighborhoods where, one, they have contamination issues for arsenic and fluoride, and two, they are more likely to be drinking that water, which is to say that there's probably a good portion of the population that is not buying safe bottled water or installing reverse osmosis systems or capturing rainwater or something like that. Now, implementing solutions, we do this mostly, again, in rural communities. We're going to be doing more of that in the urban center as well. But this is the main thing that we do is rainwater harvesting systems. Why rainwater? Because rainwater doesn't have arsenic and fluoride. Arsenic and fluoride are so difficult to remove that it's just easier to look for another source of water. This is the most actionable thing any of us can do right now to deal with both the water quality as well as the water scarcity issues in our region, is to try to capture rain as much as possible. Now, there's lots of other organizations that are doing this as well. It's a very effective solution. The Midday Rotary Club, for instance, is an amazing example. They've built well over 1,000 or 1,200 of these over the years. And mainly what we do is we do many different models. This is a pretty common model here where it's a community-driven model where we provide the materials and the training and the ongoing, the follow-up and all of that, and the ongoing monitoring evaluation. And the community puts together all of the decision-making. They decide where these systems go, which impacted communities, and as well as all of the labor and ongoing maintenance costs over time. Today, we worked in about 78 different communities and installing these solutions in about 30 different schools, creating a few million liters of rainwater harvesting storage capacity. We partner all of these systems with our own ceramic water filters because rainwater itself is not drinkable, especially since it has to sit for an 8-month dry season. It needs to be treated for biological contaminants. Again, that's the pathogens. Waterborne pathogens are the #1 cause of water-related illness and death in the world, so we do have to treat that, and we do that with a simple household filter that we've developed here in Caminos de Agua. Now, just kind of getting close to ending, I promise, is our technology development program. So we work with really cutting-edge academic institutions and other institutions like Engineers Without Borders and some other groups around the world on developing water technologies. Now, our goal is to not develop technologies if we don't have to. It's to research and find what works out there. But one thing that we basically found is that rainwater is really a really important solution. It's the most actionable solution, but these are really big systems, and this is a household scale system that's going to impact maybe 1 to 3 households maximum. It's going to provide enough cooking and drinking water for 1 to 3 households. Now, this is going to take about 200 hours to build, and the entire investment for this entire system is up front. We pay for everything at once. So we decided years ago to start looking at how we can develop other solutions, basically because the demand is so large, and trying to do it with only rainwater, it's going to take us decades and tens of millions of dollars to be able to get everybody off of contaminated groundwater, and we just simply can't wait. There's too much need, and we're trying to get this entire generation off of contaminated water as quickly as we possibly can. So that's been the main thing we've been focusing on. We have 3 major programs that we're doing. I'm not going to go into specifics with these, but arsenic quantification. Basically, arsenic's really hard to test for in the field. So it's really expensive. We have to send all of our testing out. So we've been working with Imperial College of London for a couple of years now on developing, as well as NC State University, on developing some field arsenic quantification methods, or method, I should say. But it's just something that's important, that we think is important, that can be important around the world. Another thing that I'm not going to talk about today, just for time, seeing that we're okay on time, but I'd like to finish up soon, is AguaDAPT, which is our biological water filter. This is what we put with our rainwater systems. We also distribute it throughout the country. This is in Chiapas, for instance, and it's just it's a biological filter. So it doesn't remove arsenic and fluoride, but it's meant to be paired with things like rainwater harvesting systems. What I do want to talk about briefly is our groundwater treatment system. This is something that we've been working on now for 6 years. And this is essentially it's essentially, the idea is that this will treat contaminated arsenic and fluoride groundwater from a community well at a centralized point, and provide enough cooking and drinking water for the entire community. So we have implemented our second pilot program. That's what this picture is right here. Well, it's what both of these pictures are. And we're working with a small community of about 80 people are participating in this, and it's online and it's running. We've spent 6 years developing it. I won't go into super specifics. I'd be happy to talk more about it at a different point, or if you have any questions later. But essentially, we've developed a system that in various stages removes arsenic, it removes fluoride, improves taste, it does a bunch of other things. But the idea is that this system here costs about the same price as one rainwater harvesting system, and it can serve up to 10 families. And we can scale that without increasing the cost substantially. So this can be scaled to treat water for 100 families, for 1,000 families. I mean, there's other challenges with how we implement that, but it doesn't increase the cost substantially. And so the idea is that we can get people off of contaminated groundwater very quickly. We can install one of these systems, theoretically within a day or two. There's a lot of other infrastructure that needs to be put in place, but we could install these very quickly and get, the entire community off of contaminated groundwater. And this is a program that we've been developing for many years, again, mostly with partners at NC State University, but also with things like Engineers Without Borders, and more recently, the University of San Luis Potosí. And just very briefly, I want to mention this, what we're doing on this front. Basically, what we're trying to do here is work with municipal, state, and federal government, and other partner organizations in a variety of different things, as well as things like international groups like GIZ, which is the German wing of the German federal government that collaborates with Mexico and lots of other regions around the world on these kind of projects, and try to create, again, more coherent use of water management, of water use throughout our region, throughout the country, create more coherent water policies, and basically looking at examples. We're only, we're about 10 years old as an organization, but we now feel like we're ready to kind of participate and take this on because we've seen how this can be replicated, or how this can be more effective in other parts of the world. We talk about things like Tucson, Arizona, who are global leaders in rainwater harvesting, and they have about half as much rainfall as we do every year. So even accounting for climate change and things like that, we can make some really important steps with water management, with rainwater management, with all these kind of things. We've been working before the pandemic with a coalition, with a network, I should say, of about 14 different NGOs in San Miguel that was working with the prior administration to create new water policies. We did things like tried to create a new construction code so that all of these new developments that were going into San Miguel are required to capture some percentage of their rainwater, either in cisterns or infiltrating into the ground, so that it can't all be paved over. So we're working on things like that. It's slow work. It's frustrating work. It's not. We're not moving rules right now, but we're slowly working with these different groups. We're working things with like the state education secretary, the state water commission on different projects, and we're looking for ways that we can create impact in the long term that will actually reduce water usage in the region and help cure our aquifers. And again, we see these examples. We see things like California, where there's been massive issues, but they have like successfully in many different places done things like reduce residential and industrial irrigation by like 40% in some areas to deal with these droughts. And so it's something that other parts of the world can do. Why can't we? So just kind of where we're going from an organizational standpoint. I'm running just a slight bit over, but I'm almost done. So we're working right now on scaling our impact. Right now, we've been able to leverage new institutional funding from foundations like the Rio Arante Foundation, very much in thanks to our individual donors, for instance, because we have to create matching funds for that type of grant. But with that, we're able to increase our impact substantially, which is going to allow us to work in 30 new rural communities over the next 3 years. Expanding rainwater specifically, as well as things like composting toilets to thousands more people. We're building hundreds of different systems over the next few years, installing hundreds of water filters, etc. We are also working on our tech development. So I mentioned our groundwater treatment system. What we're looking to do right now is that we've got this one system that's in place and working and providing clean drinking water for a local community. We have a lot of work to do with them to figure out the social implementation. That's really the secret sauce for us, is you can have the technology, but if you don't have a way to implement it socially, what's the point? So we're working with the community over the next year to really figure out the social implementation model of this and how this is going to work. And then we can take that to market, not to market, but we can scale it up and start impacting other communities. And we're working things with groups like the State Water Commission, who are doing similar projects, and figuring out how we can work with them and some other groups on how to implement this with a much greater reach. We're also going to be taking our water filter, which I mentioned, to market by 2020, which is going to be distributed through partner organizations throughout the country, creating a much more important impact. And we're going to keep working on this collaboration and policy issue, where, how do we integrate these other examples into, whether it's municipal, state, or even federal water policy. We're participating in various networks around the country, as well as locally, and trying to find how we can make a much greater impact, and again, on some of these more root causes of the crisis, like agricultural water use and things like that. So just to kind of summarize here, because I know I gave a lot of information, probably too much information for a 45-minute talk, 50-minute talk, but I just want to say these are my main takeaways, is that we have a finite water supply. It is dwindling, and it's increasingly contaminated with these very hard to remove chemicals, in our case, arsenic and fluoride. The growing industrial agriculture, again, mostly for export, is the main culprit, and this creates threats to all of us. But again, important to know that it really is mostly low-income rural communities who are at the greatest risk. who don't have the solutions necessarily in place and are more at risk for things like their wells drying up and things like that. So because of that, we have to create and implement solutions that provide access to clean water, especially for these communities, while also creating coherent water policy and management in the long term. So again, we have to find that balance. And you know, we are a small NGO. We're not going to be able to do that alone, and that's why we're partnering with, whether they're NGOs, institutions, universities, et cetera, to try to create that impact in the long term. I also think it's important to know that we're not alone. You know, unfortunately, this is happening globally. Water scarcity is a global issue. This new class of chemical contaminants is a global issue. It's impacting water supplies everywhere. And so, you know, we need many more people working on this. We have, you know, more and more people working on these issues. And with that, I think it's important to know that this crisis can be solved, but it definitely requires action, and it requires much more broad support, which again is one of the reasons why I'm here today, is trying to get the word out to as many people as possible and continue to build support. So just ending here, you know, what else can you do if you were inspired at all by this talk? You know, you can continue to educate yourself. That can come in various different ways, but you can get your water tested. You can sign up for our mailing list. We started a new recent monthly bulletin where every month we're going much deeper into these issues. So for instance, last month we published one on agricultural water use. So what does that actually mean? How does it work? You know, we're trying to educate people on, you know, every month go deeper on a specific issue. And with that, I would say, you know, you could also, we have plenty of materials. You know, we've got things like rainwater harvesting calculators we've developed online that you can get to through our website, manuals and things like that. And you can capture rainwater yourself. You can do a lot of these solutions yourself. Even just installing the right filter system is going a long way. So I really encourage all of you to do something like that. You can also educate others. We are doing talks like this right now, virtual talks. Historically, we started doing a lot more meet and greet events where we were invited into people's homes, and we gave small kind of neighborhood talks to, you know, 25 people at a time in someone's home. So if you want to help us host one of those at some point, please feel free to reach out. And you can also just, you know, tell your neighbors, families, and friends to check out the problem and to educate themselves on it. And of course, you know, we are a nonprofit organization. We do have, you know, some institutional support and foundation support and things like that, but we really do rely on individual donors who are you know, mostly in San Miguel, who are impacted by these issues. So we always welcome, you know, new and recurring donors. Please, you know, consider us when you're considering your giving. But we also are always looking for volunteers. We're located right here in San Miguel. We have very specific needs. Lots of them are technical or translation. We have all sorts of different needs, but you can feel free to reach out to us either directly through our website or to me, and I'll make sure to get you in touch with the right person on my team. I'll give my contact information in just a second here. And also things, we bring in lots of different technical interns. One of our major ways that we've been able to advance our technology over time is, you know, we have an in-house team of technical engineers that oversee a world of interns and volunteers and technical fellows. So these are people who come from Mexico and from around the world to spend 6 months to a year with us working on some specific technical challenges related to arsenic and fluoride removal and all these other things. And, you know, if you have a house or a place to host them, we try to offer them 3 weeks when they first come on ground. If they're coming from either out of state or out of country, we look for a way to put them up. So I really encourage, at the very least, go to our website and sign up for our monthly bulletins and our mailing list. I think we put out very good information, and hopefully that will help continue the dialogue. So just ending there, here is our information. Our website is caminosdeagua.org, and my personal email, you can just contact me directly at Dylan, that's DYLAN, at caminosdeagua.org. So with that, I will end the talk now. And if anybody has any questions, now will be the time. I will open. Okay. So my apologies. It sounds like the first 2 slides I put up were blank. My apologies. I did not see that before. Does anybody have any questions? You can feel free to unmute if you want, or just put them here in the chat. I've got that open.
I have a question.
Sure.
If 85% of the water is going to agriculture, what can Caminos de Agua do about that? Because I understand, now I'm no longer guilty about my 10-minute shower, but I don't feel like I can do anything about agriculture.
Yeah, so again, that's kind of what we're doing as far as we're trying to collaborate with more national networks and municipal, state, and federal government on creating more coherent water policies. And so it's an uphill battle for sure, but it's something we've been, we've been working with the Subsecretary of Agriculture for a number of years on various different things. We've presented to the state agricultural secretary, and we're trying to get these issues on the table. And I think one thing that we can offer as an NGO specifically is that we don't have term limits. We're here, and the thing is that, every 3 years we have a new municipal government. We have new state government at least every 6 years, new federal government every 6 years. And with that, we lose momentum. And so we need someone who's there trying to bring up these issues, especially every time a new administration comes over, to make sure that these issues are on the table and are being discussed and looked at. So that's a big part of what we do now, is making sure that we find forums and ways that we can talk about these issues and hopefully create change. Again, it's a long-term strategy. It's not going to happen tomorrow, but little by little, we have made some inroads, and they're not going to sound super promising right now, but over time, we do think that this can be solved. Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Mm-hmm. Oh, sorry. It looks like we have a couple questions here. So our bottle. So the question here is bottled water, garrafones, are they safe and have no arsenic and fluoride in it? Generally speaking, we say yes. Most of the water we've tested has been fine in bottled water. There's some strategies you can do to test yourself, which we can provide that information later. But generally speaking, we found that it is safe. That said, most of these plants are using reverse osmosis, and that's the standard, the commercial way to treat for these contaminants. And that's something you can install in your own house. You can kind of cut out the middleman for about 4,000 or 5,000 pesos. So just a few $100, you can install one of those systems in your own home and cut out the middleman and do that yourself. And it's it's semi-complicated to install. You definitely need a plumber to install it, but it's pretty easy to check over time and make sure that it's working. So yes, I would say, if you have to buy bottled water, we have found it to be largely safe. We specifically recommend Marnier water bottles just because their plant is actually in San Miguel, and we've toured it and we've tested it and we've seen how they do their spot checks and their ongoing testing and everything like that. And we found that basically they're above board and they do a very good job at their treatment. The problem with other things like the big ones like Cielo and Santorini is that most of that comes from Querétaro or from Celaya, and we've tested it, but that's really just showing what happened at the plant that day. It doesn't give us really good long-term information. So if you can find something more local like Marnier, or if there's anything else more local that is a better solution, also installing reverse osmosis in your own home is a very effective way as well. Okay, so just another note here, it says politics of large agriculture is greater than the average person, and I don't know if there's any other questions. Happy to answer other questions. Okay. Well, again, I want to thank Father Woodward and St. Paul's Church for hosting this and getting this out. And please feel free again to email us directly if you have any other questions. We'd be happy to answer them for you. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Dylan. Will this be something that we can post a recorded version of?
I believe so. I believe my team recorded it here, so I'll double check with them. But it looks like it's recording, so I just have to ask them how to get it, and we can send it your way for sure.
Great, appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem.
Thank you, Dylan.
Thank you all.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you for all the wonderful work you're doing. We need it.
Well, thank you so much. Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.